It's August 15th, 1947. You're standing in Delhi watching the Union Jack get lowered for the last time. History calls this a moment of liberation, the noble end of an empire. But what if that's a lie? What if this wasn't a moral victory but a bankruptcy notice? The history books tell a story of changing ideals, of a world waking up to the evils of colonialism. But they leave out the most important part, the balance sheet. And that balance sheet is the secret to understanding why the most powerful empire the world has ever known was forced to give it all away. It wasn't that Britain had a change of heart, it was that Britain was flat broke. To understand how it all ended in financial ruin, we have to go back to the very beginning. Not to a battlefield, but to a boardroom. Because this entire story starts not with an army, but with a piece of paper. A royal charter signed by Queen Elizabeth I on the last day of the year 1600. It granted a small group of English merchants a monopoly on all trade east of Africa. They called it the Governor and Company of Merchants of London Trading into the East Indies. We know it as the East India Company. At first it looked harmless, just a handful of ships looking to trade for spices, silk, and tea. But this wasn't just a company, it was a prototype. A new kind of beast that fused corporate power with state power. It was a corporation that would soon have its own army, its own currency, and an insatiable, terrifying hunger for profit that would reshape the world and ultimately consume its creators. For its first 150 years, the East India Company operated more or less as you'd expect. It built trading posts, navigated complex local politics, and made its shareholders a decent return. It was a guest in a powerful and wealthy Mughal empire. But in the mid-18th century, the Mughal authority was crumbling, creating a power vacuum. And as the old saying goes, chaos is a ladder. The company man who saw that ladder most clearly was Robert Clive. He wasn't a soldier or a diplomat, he was a corporate clerk. But he had a genius for manipulation and violence. The turning point was the Battle of Plassey in 1757. With a small force, a lot of bribery, and a convenient rainstorm that soaked his opponent's gunpowder, Clive defeated the Nawab of Bengal. After the smoke cleared, the game had changed. The company wasn't just trading anymore. A few years later, in 1765, the weak Mughal emperor granted the company the Diwani. This was the right to collect taxes from a region of 30 million people. Let that sink in. A private corporation with shareholders in London was now the tax collector for an entire country. Overnight, the flow of money reversed. The money now flowed in only one direction, out of India and into the pockets of the company and its investors. With the power to tax came the power to destroy. Britain didn't just conquer India, it systematically deindustrialized it. For centuries, India was the textile workshop of the world. Its fabrics were legendary for their quality. In 1700, at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, India's share of the world economy was a staggering 27%. That's larger than the entire economy of Europe combined. But the British Empire had a different plan. They designed a perfect predatory economic loop, and it worked in 3 simple, brutal steps. Step 1, destroy local industry. The company imposed crippling taxes on Indian weavers, making their products artificially expensive. At the same time, they flooded Indian markets with cheap, mass-produced textiles from their own factories in Manchester. Competition wasn't just discouraged, it was legislated out of existence. Indian weavers were driven into poverty by the millions. Competition wasn't just discouraged, it was legislated out of existence. Indian weavers were driven into poverty by the millions. Step 2, force raw material extraction. India was forcibly converted into a raw material supplier, forced to grow the cotton that fed British factories. They bought this cotton for pennies on the dollar, a price set by the buyers, not the sellers. Step 3, create a captive market. Those finished textiles were shipped back to India and sold to the very people who grew the cotton, but at a massive markup. It was a closed loop of extraction designed for maximum profit. By 1900, India's share of the world economy had collapsed from 27% to just 2%. The wealth wasn't just taken, the ability to create wealth was stolen. This wasn't trade, it was a heist on a continental scale. Economist Utsa Patnaik calculated that between 1765 and 1938, Britain drained a total of nearly $45 trillion from India. That's trillion with a T. But this wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. This economic vampirism was paid for in human lives. When the company's focus shifted to cash crops, the production of food for local consumption plummeted. The result was famine. During the Great Bengal Famine of 1770, an estimated 10 million people starved to death, a third of the population. While people died in the streets, the company was still ruthlessly collecting taxes, even increasing them. And when pure greed wasn't profitable enough, the empire turned to drugs. The East India Company became the single largest drug cartel in human history. It forced Indian farmers to grow poppy, processed it into opium, and then smuggled it into China, creating a massive addiction crisis. When the Chinese emperor tried to stop this, Britain declared war twice. They went to war to defend the right of their corporation to sell drugs. This system was incredibly profitable. It funded Britain's Industrial Revolution. It built the grand cities of London, Liverpool, and Glasgow. The empire looked strong, invincible even, but it was all built on a foundation of debt, a moral debt, and as it would turn out, a fatal financial one. For a long time, the system worked for Britain, but a system built on endless extraction is, by definition, unsustainable. And in the 20th century, the bill for a century of imperial arrogance finally came due. The catalyst? 2 world wars. When World War I broke out, Britain again turned to its colonies. India supplied over 1.3 million soldiers and contributed a colossal sum to the war effort. Britain promised greater self-governance in return, a promise it quickly broke once the war was over. But it was World War II that dealt the fatal blow. The war was existential for Britain, and it threw everything it had into survival. And once again, the empire sent the bill to India. Over 2.5 million Indian soldiers fought for Britain. The country's entire economy was retooled for the war effort. But this time was different. Britain couldn't pay for these goods and services with cash. It was broke. So it financed the war on credit, with India as its biggest lender. The British government essentially issued IOUs to its own colony. By the end of the war in 1945, the numbers were catastrophic. Britain was victorious, but utterly bankrupt. Its national debt had soared to over 240% of its GDP. Its industrial infrastructure was bombed out. Its cities were in ruins. And the final beautiful irony? After 200 years of draining trillions from India, Britain now owed India over 1.3 billion. The parasite had finally bled its host dry, and in the process had bled itself to death. The empire was broke, and its biggest colony was now its biggest creditor. Britain simply couldn't afford its empire anymore. So when that Union Jack was lowered in Delhi in 1947, it wasn't a gift of freedom. It was a liquidation sale. It was an overextended, bankrupt nation cutting its biggest expense. Maintaining the empire was no longer profitable. The moral arguments for independence were vital, but they were a convenient excuse for a decision that had already been made on a ledger in London. Britain didn't leave India because it was the right thing to do. It left because it was the only thing to do. But this isn't just a history lesson, it's a warning. History doesn't just repeat, it rhymes. The British Empire made a trillion-dollar mistake. It believed that it could maintain global military dominance through a system of extraction and debt forever. Today, another global superpower maintains over 750 military bases in 80 countries worldwide. Its defense spending is larger than the next 10 countries combined. And its national debt is soaring past $34 trillion, a number so large it's almost meaningless. The model is eerily similar, projecting immense power across the globe, funded by a complex financial system that feels increasingly stretched thin. The British Empire's fatal error wasn't just financial, it was moral. It was the arrogance of believing the bill would never come due. But the bill always comes due. And when it does, empires don't collapse with a bang. They collapse with the quiet stroke of an accountant's pen, realizing the money has finally run out. Subscribe to see more stories history tried to forget.